Ian Foster's decision to name Sam Cane as AB captain before any form had been looked at. Is he the form number 7 at present, given the likes of Dalton Papali'i and Duplessis Karifi? They're in blistering form. It's a tough one. Does form beat leadership? What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, this is going to become a debate because in the end you're looking at players across Super Rugby basically. When you look at where Sam Cane is right now, how do you look at that decision to announce him as All Black captain early?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look, I'll just first answer Bernie's question, is he the form number 7? No, he's not. Is he the form number 7 at the Chiefs? No, he's not. Boshier is form number 7 at the Chiefs. And in my opinion, the guy that's probably the form number 7 of the competition is Dalton Papali'i. And you look at what Dalton is bringing, he's bringing physicality, which Sam Cane normally brings. So the tackles that Dalton makes, they are real tackles and they hurt people. And that's what Sam normally brings. Will Sam get back there? I'm pretty sure he will, but he's not there at the moment.
That's what I reckon too, because he's been out for a long time. We've got to remember that. And we're talking about leadership at the top level, All Black level. That's what Sam Cane brings, a wealth of leadership. And he's got the respect of that squad.
These are uncertain times, aren't they?
Yes,
They're uncertain
100%.
times where I think everyone was looking for leadership, and Ian Foster had looked at Sam Cane and has faith in him, JK, to lead this group going forward. We've got to remember this is Test match rugby. Now, we get talked to all the time of the fact Super Rugby form is not like Test matches, but we know this competition is not far off it.
Yeah, easy decision. He'll be All Black captain. We'll judge him on that form. I think the bigger question is, are we going to pick on form for this current All Black side, or are we going to give some of the established guys, and it's always been harder to get out of the All Blacks than it has been getting. I'm sure Sam will be fine. It's about decision-making at the next level. The thing that's interesting me is Rugby Aotearoa the closest thing to Test rugby at the moment?
You ask the players, and they look at it, and they're saying it's as close as they can get. So, you know, I've got faith in Sam Cane that he's going to get back to his best as well, Bernie.
I agree, Jeff, and I think the key thing too is that form is temporary, isn't it? But leadership remains, and he's such a great, inspiring leader.
Yes, as was. Our form was temporary. Our form was very temporary.
All right, well, last week, Sir Steve Hansen said that New Zealand rugby owes Australia nothing, absolutely nothing. This week, World Cup winner Rod Kafer said that Aussie rugby needs to go it alone. The former Wallaby said that contemplating a New Zealand-Aussie comp was a fundamentally flawed concept and that players are, and I quote, mentally scarred by consistent losses to Kiwi teams. It's almost a good thing for us, really, isn't it? The world rankings would back that up. Aussie, they're number 7 in the world, and they've lost the last 17 Bledisloe Cup series. Here are the issues. Firstly, we're at odds over numbers. It's our party and we'll invite who we want to it. And not everyone's happy that there's a cap of between only 2 and 4 likely to be asked to indulge in party games and take home a balloon and a goodie bag. In fact, Rugby Australia chairman Hamish McLennan wants to be a partner at the negotiating table, not left to fend for scraps. And he believes that broadcasters and sponsors, they'd prefer a bigger comp, 10 to 12 teams. What if New Zealand has no one to play with in the sandpit next year? Well, it would get pretty boring playing themselves next year, he says. Fair point. And what of the Pacific team? Well, McLennan loves the idea, but thinks it should be based in Sydney. Basing them in Auckland would be detrimental to the Blues. It would be madness for the Blues. Again, he may have a good point. Back to the Aussies, though. Are they genuinely strong enough to front 5 teams? Peter Fitzsimons says no. He thinks 5 teams dilutes top players and that their impact gets lost. He adds that often Aussie teams were reduced to doing a victory lap when they won a coin toss against New Zealand. Ouch. He's clear that never has Australian rugby needed New Zealand rugby as much as we do right now. So, what does the NZR make of it all? Jeff spoke with Mark Robinson just a short time ago.
Mark, thanks very much for coming on the show tonight. A lot of noise coming out of Australia at the moment. What's our relationship as it stands right now with Australian rugby?
Oh, look, we're entering a really exciting time, Jeff, that we're looking forward to working through more discussions in the next little while about the prospect of the competition we're talking about. So, you know, as is the case in any of these sort of discussions, we just need to work through understanding what all the different parties will need and stay true to the process in this and look forward to more and more constructive dialogue.
Is Australian rugby important to you? Do we need them in terms of their support financially as well as the fact their competition?
Oh, absolutely. We've been very clear that we see opportunities to work with Rugby Australia as being critical to both organisation's success, and more broadly, the opportunities to work into the Pacific and the broader South Pacific area. So nothing's changed around that, and we're very clear that we'd like a positive, constructive working relationship.
So out of the Aotearoa review, you've talked about the structure or what you're looking towards in terms of a Super Rugby competition per se, maybe 8 to 10 teams. If I look at that, how does the ownership of that competition work?
Well, there's a number of things, I guess, that are sitting behind the review to date, Jeff, that need further work, and I guess the ownership and the overall regulation of the competition is one of those. So we've looked at a number of different examples from around the world, including places like Australia and into the States and the UK, as to what the ownership structures might be and how the competition will be organised. And we're just going to take a little bit more time as part of this consultation process with all of the different potential participants in the competition to work through and understand what their requirements might be. So we've got some broad ideas, but to be fair to teams that we want to work with, we'd like to give them some input and insight into those ideas before we move too much further.
You've called for expressions of interest, though, in terms of this competition. Is that a global opening for anybody to maybe get involved? Are you trying to keep it within the Pacific?
Well, we expect the teams to be based out of the Pacific Basin area, Jeff, but that's not to say there won't be potential investors or people with interest wanting to come into the process that reside from in the Northern Hemisphere. There could be expat Kiwis or Australians or people connected to Pacifica living in different parts of the world that may very well want to be involved. So we're keeping a very, very open mind at the moment and excited about some of the conversations we've had in the last few days since we announced on Friday, and looking forward to learning more about these expressions of interest as we work through it.
One of those possibilities you've talked about is a Pacific Island team coming into Super Rugby. Australian Rugby have indicated their desire for that as well. What would be, for you, the purpose of this side?
Well, a lot of fan research has gone into the Aotearoa review, Jeff, and one of the things that is highlighted is there is a keen appetite from a whole range of potential interested parties, be it fans, be it sponsors or broadcasters, around the introduction of a Pacific team. And quite frankly, we just think it's the right thing to do as well. It's good for rugby, it's good for our region, good for our communities, and great for our fans. So, they are the sorts of things that are driving our decision-making around the competition at present, and we're excited about the colour, the vibrancy that it'll bring to a competition. We only get so many opportunities to do this sort of thinking in rugby. In fact, we haven't had one for some time. So we want to really make sure that we remain as open as possible. We consider all expressions of interest on its merits and work through it with the people that want to engage with us.
So when you're opening these opportunities to franchises, does that mean, like a Pacific Island team, that all of a sudden some of the control contractually New Zealand Rugby have had over players, centralised contracting, would that have to be relaxed to give an opportunity for more movement?
The things like eligibility, high performance pathways, how these teams work in with provincial unions, ownership, governance, funding will be worked through over the next little while, and they're all very fair questions. We just need a little bit more time to work through some of them, and we have to balance what's right and best interests of New Zealand Rugby, and balance that with the entities coming into the competition, obviously, in the case of Pacifica.
If you talk about stakeholders, there's so many involved here. But let's first deal with this relationship with Australia. He mentioned the word critical there, JK, the fact looking across the Tasman.
Sorry, mate, I'm just laughing because I thought after that interview he's got another 457 meetings to do.
Yeah, exactly.
They haven't decided on anything.
Well, I mean, that's the challenge, right, KT, was when you start talking about all these invested parties, when you're trying to put something together like this, but all of a sudden this back and forth we're seeing that's being played out in the media, I still get the sense behind closed doors there's a feeling they do need each other.
Yeah, totally. And I think the thing that stood out for me financially, he said that was one of the things he spoke about with the Australian team. We're looking forward. We've got to look past next year or the year before. We've got to look 10 years down the track, because the Aussies, they're going to get a World Cup at some stage, and we're going to be able to have to bounce off that as well. Those are the things also they've got to take into consideration.
Yeah, but I don't know. Look, for me, it's pretty easy. I believe you either want the Australians in or you don't. I want them in. But I think right at the moment, we don't want 5 teams in.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. I think we have to create an opportunity. And I don't know why there's all this talk coming out saying that we're arrogant and we don't care, because we do. But at the moment, what we're saying is that 5 squads from Australia is too many. Yeah. Right?
Well, you just want a good product, don't you? And it is right. If you've got 5 Australian teams, your product is not going to be good because they're far too diluted, aren't they? But the other thing too, if you've got 5, say you've got 3, which I personally think is a good number, 3, the wage bill is also less. You know what I mean? And we know that money is an issue.
Well, in saying that, though, we had Andrew Forrester last week, and he's a massive part of the Western Force. Yes. But they're the side that were on the outer, KT. They were the one that fought their way back in on the back of support and resource support.
Yeah. But just merge them for a year. Queensland and...
Well,
merge them for a year.
Whether it's the Rebels and the Brumbies,
he's got the money.
You come together.
Put them together for a year.
But in saying that, if they want 5 teams, and there's 5 teams in New Zealand, where does that leave the Pacific Island side that everyone's talking about?
One thing I want to put here right now, the Pacific Island team is for what? If the Pacific Island team is for the Pacific Island and the players to give them opportunity, it needs to be in the Pacific Islands. Yeah. To take money there, to take revenue there, to take jobs there, get the players over there. You know, it doesn't need to be in Australia and it doesn't need to be in New Zealand. I firmly believe that.
Well, we just showed a clip then of the most recent PI team where Wax and Sitovini in there. Yeah. They're All Blacks. Yeah. I'm sure that's not what they're looking for the growth of Pacific game, because all they did is those 2 boys, they played for the PI team and then they come and played for us. I'm sure that's not the idea of it.
Australia talked about the desire for them to have it, say, in Sydney. We've got to remember that Sydney's the same population as New Zealand. I mean, you're talking about the depth of play. Now, we know rugby's not the #1 sport.
No one's going. No one's going. There was 1,500 people, Waratahs versus Blues, pre-COVID.
Yeah, so if we look at those contests, the fact that we go and look at the form of their sides, how much, when we talk about this relationship, how much would we be prepared to give when you look at it? And are they good enough, these Australian teams?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, man. And Robbo, what got for me is he spoke about the vibrancy and the right thing to do, and I'm with you, JK. It has to be in the Pacific Islands to be able to gain that traction and like I said, be built and played by the Pacific Island players, not the ones staying here in New Zealand or Australia. That's where you get that.
The reality is, though, JK, that the very best Pacific Island players that are playing in Europe, they are going to be on such good contracts that they are supporting villages and families and the like, you know, and you can understand that. We've had players from New Zealand who have left for that very, very reason. The fact they're not going to come back and play in this competition for a quarter of the money.
Well, the way I see it is that Pacific Island descent people born in New Zealand are on a pathway. If they're good at rugby, they're on a pathway here. There's our system. But I believe it's the Pacific Island players that are back in the islands. I always thought that a Pacific Island team was for them. Am I wrong, KT?
No, I agree.
And if you want to help the Pacific Islands, you've got to put the income back into there. You know, fix up one of the stadiums, play right around the islands. You know, for me, it's not about being in South Auckland and not about being in Sydney.
I actually think, though, G, I reckon some of those blokes will come back, the older guys that maybe come in near the end, like their last third of their career. I think they'll come back to the islands. They want to make a point of this Super Rugby team come in and join that and help those young guys try and merge that gap. Maybe they might not be as competitive.
Any concerns for you, KT, trying to bring together the 3 different cultures because they're very competitive against each other when they play? Yeah. Is that a concern? Is the fact, I mean, because it's not easy when you're putting together a team, and the fact that the different backgrounds, everyone's motivated differently. Would you see that being any issue?
I don't think so. I think like, when we were running around, there was very distinct lines amongst Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, or whatever. I think now a lot of the guys play with each other, been around a lot. I don't think there's that much of a drama anymore in terms of that.
How much responsibility would be then on New Zealand rugby and Australian rugby to support this venture and to make sure it happened properly? And what do you think World Rugby would think about this, given the fact that they've distributed into the islands and they haven't seen, to this date, you'd think, great results? Yeah,
it would certainly be a nursing from New Zealand and Australia, and I think when you look at it over the years, we've done quite well out of the islands and so have Australia. So it is a time to sort of grow the game if we want this game to genuinely be a global game. You know, and if we really want it to be a genuine global game, well, that's where it's got to go. And as you guys said, it's got to go to the islands. Fiji.
And I tell you what, it has to happen sooner rather than later. If you start talking about being involved next year, if it's to happen, really challenging.
Just one thing. He said it's the right thing to do. So if it's the right thing to do, everyone helps pay and everyone looks after the Pacific Island, including World Rugby and the French.